Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SRHM podcast, which explores new research and emerging trends in the field of sexual and reproductive health and rights, with a focus on using rights-based knowledge for action.
Hello, and welcome to the SRHM podcast. I'm Laura Ferguson. I'm part of the editorial team at SRHM and co-author of the recent SRHM Editorial Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights in Palestine, Securing Spaces to Speak Out. In many spaces, fear is stifling discussion of the situation in Palestine, but the world ostensibly comes together around human rights, a globally designed and agreed upon set of rules for humanity. And as a sexual and reproductive health and rights community, we must continue to document rights violations, to amplify the specific sexual and reproductive health harms being caused, and to mobilize for action to ensure sexual and reproductive health and rights are protected, especially in times of crisis and for generations to come. And it's in this spirit that I welcome the authors of a powerful commentary recently published in the SRHM journal, No Justice in a Genocide, Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights in Gaza. Cordelia Freeman is a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter, UK. Her work is broadly on borders, mobility, and violence. And Hala Shoman is a PhD researcher in sociology at Newcastle University, focusing on Palestinian women at the intersection of colonial and patriarchal violence. In this commentary, as scholars of reproductive justice, Cordelia and Hala explore the violations of sexual and reproductive health and rights in Gaza through the lens of reproductive justice in order to uplift the research and documentation proving such violations and call on the sexual and reproductive health and rights community to recognize the destruction of reproductive justice in Palestine. Cordelia, Hala, a very warm welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation. Let's begin. I guess just to start, could you give us an overview of what's happening to sexual and reproductive health services in Gaza right now, and what compelled you to write this paper?
Thank you so much, Laura. It's great to be chatting to you today about this. The inspiration for this commentary came from when I read the editorial that you co-wrote last September about Palestine. And in that, you wrote that there had only been one submission on Palestine since October 2023. And I was shocked at reading that. And that was a moment for me that made me reconsider my position as a reproductive justice scholar and my role and responsibility in writing and speaking out about what's been happening in Gaza. So previously, before that, I hadn't really felt like I had a right, really, to write anything because my work is on reproductive justice in Latin America. But reading that made me realize that people aren't speaking out. Just leaving it for someone else to say it wasn't going to be an option. And I had recently given a talk at the pro-Palestine encampment here at the university on reproductive justice in Palestine. So I thought, okay, this is something that I could repurpose into a commentary. But I didn't want to write that alone as someone who doesn't have expertise in Palestine. And so I reached out and had the honor of writing this with Hala, who has much more expertise of what's really happening on the ground there.
Thank you so much, Cordelia. That's very important. And thank you, Laura, for having us. Before I begin of the context of the sexual reproductive or the reproductive injustices happening in Gaza or reproductive genocide, I'll say some stories that stayed with me on things happening in Gaza. And the first one is for my friend in Gaza. She is 32 years old, the mother of 3 little daughters. And she's always been so happy having them, raising them, living with them, and all of that. And when the genocide started, she said something that resonated, and I heard it a lot from so many other women. She said, "I wish if I can return my daughters to my womb." She wanted to bring them back or put them back to her womb so she's able to feed them, protect them in a way, have them easily, just inside her so she doesn't have to worry about them all the time. And this is something that so many parents and women have thought of due to the genocide environment, but also because of the destruction of reproductive capacity and the ability to raise children in genocidal environment. The second thing, or the second example, is a video that went viral a few days ago, 2 days ago approximately, for a mother that was crying, and she was saying that she's at the time of delivery, but she doesn't wish to bring her baby out. And she said that everyone looking at me doesn't believe that I'm pregnant because I look so thin and the baby is so small because of the malnutrition, because of the anemia, because of the situation in Gaza. And I'm so afraid of bringing this child to the world where I can't feed the baby, I can't breast milk, I can't bring diapers or safety to this child. So those are a little bit of examples showing how the situation in Gaza is very, very difficult for people. Since the beginning of the genocide at the 7th of October 2023, things got only worse in terms of reproduction. So we're not saying that reproductive injustices or reproductive genocide just started with the genocide. No, it's have been always bad for reproduction due to the Israeli occupation, due to the Israeli colonialism, as intent to eradicate Palestinians and their existence. But to give a little bit of context, what happened through the over 20 months of genocide in Gaza, how everything against reproduction have intensified. We have to remember that since the beginning of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, women, the miscarriage rate have raised to 300%, so skyrocketing percentage. Also, Israel have bombarded more than 80% of hospitals and healthcare facilities in Gaza, damaging maternity wards, the infrastructure, and also places like fertility clinics as Al-Basma, a clinic where Israel have damaged more than 5,000 potential lives or embryos, and also 1,000 specimens and unfertilized eggs. Also, Israeli genocide have affected the situation, all the medical situation in Gaza, killing more than 1,400 health professionals. Many of them are gynecologists, so the senior experienced doctors have been either murdered, kidnapped, or they're missing within the genocide, and that's affecting the situation of women and reproductive health in Gaza. Also with siege, the blockade over Gaza that stayed for more than 18 years, but with the genocide, Israel have intensified it to unbelievable level. So they forced famine, they forced also blockade over medical materials and supplies. And because of that, there is no antibiotics, anesthetics, and painkillers to the level that women have to go through C-sections without adequate anesthesia. And they have to go through a process of, opening of 7 layers of their body without any type of painkillers. And there are some videos, unfortunately, that went viral on documenting those examples. Also, with the Israeli genocide over Gaza, women were denied sanitary pads, sanitary products, hygienic products. They all were denied with the Israeli occupation, and also contraceptives are not allowed into Gaza. And I'll end up by the situation of children in Gaza. You know that the newborns in Gaza are dying due to the lack of milk, due to the lack of incubators, forced and orchestrated by the Israeli occupation, genocidal environment, and due to the forced famine. And there is just a report that was just published saying that children underneath the age of 5 are facing tenfold mortality more than before the 7th of October. So talking about reproduction, it's affecting women, men, and children in a very, very scary level, affecting their ability to live, but also their ability to reproduce or exist in the future and then reproduce after that.
Thank you so much, both of you, for that. And thank you, Hala, in particular, for sharing the personal stories. And, I know that we know that, but hearing these stories from you about your friends, about people and their very real fears, I think is a very powerful reminder for us that when we're sharing statistics or talking about human rights violations, that we're really talking about real people and a shared humanity, which I hope we all have concern for. So thank you for that. Moving on, I wonder, could you give us a brief overview of the reproductive justice framework and how you apply it in your paper? So why is it important to use this lens to understand the current situation in Gaza? And how does it lead you to the conclusion you make that what we're seeing amounts to reproductive genocide?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So reproductive justice as a framework, as an activist and scholarly framework, was developed by Black US activists and scholars in the early to mid 1990s. And it's based around 3 core tenets: the right to have children, the right not to have children, and the right to parent any children in safe environments with dignity. And so we use this as a way to structure the commentary in order to document the violations in terms of people's sexual and reproductive health and rights that are very clearly happening and have been shown and proven by many different organizations. So we find this a useful way to show, for example, that how can you have a right to have a child when healthcare has been decimated, when people that you might be having children with have been killed, when you can't access the basic facilities, like Hala was just saying, they've been targeted and bombed, when doctors have been murdered. It takes away that possibility to that right to have a child. And secondly, the right not to have a child. How can that right exist when you don't have a right to access contraception, when there isn't access to abortion services? And then, of course, how can you possibly raise your children in safe environments when a genocide is happening? So we've seen the huge levels of killing, as well as the chemicals that are existing in people's environment through chemical warfare, through the lack of access to services to care. And so we use the term reproductive genocide in this paper, which was developed by the Palestinian Feminist Collective, really saying that how can we talk about justice? How can we talk about rights in the context of a genocide when you don't have a right to survive, when you don't have a right to exist? And we think this is a really powerful way of articulating the extreme severity of what we're seeing in Gaza right now. And Hala, you probably have more to add to that point.
Thank you so much. It's been very important and very productive to use this framework because it's structured like talking about things and show that there were denial of all of those justice pillars to reach the conclusion that framework of injustice does not equate what's happening or unfolding right now in Gaza. And we need something like reproductive genocide to speak about that more broadly, because it's all of those that we're talking about. It's not just injustices. They're way more than that. Deliberate, systematic attacks on women, men, reproductive capacities, and reproductive health. But before going to that, before we explain further on that, we need to understand that the situation in Gaza was not like this before the genocide. So Gaza have been under more than 18 years of Israeli strict blockade. It has faced at least 6 Israeli aggressions before this genocide, the last one in May 2023, so 5 months before the genocide started. And although we had all of that, we made our best for our community to be able to live the best life possible, to reproduce in a safer environment, in more justice capacities. And for that, we had many primary health clinics, UN and governmental, that women were able to go for to follow up with their pregnancies, with their husbands or whoever they wanted to go with. We had prenatal support, we had through the pregnancy support, and we had afternatal support. And we have so many private clinics and people who are providing also advanced services like infertility clinics and those types of services to women and men so they can reproduce in safer environments. So although everything that we've been through, we have done our best to our community to be able to reproduce in better ways. But when the genocide started, as Cordelia have explained, on the 3 pillars that we divided the article on, everything was decimated. So talking about the first one, the right of women and men, the right to have children, this one is damaged, as Cordelia have explained, by killing of people, by killing of those who enable reproduction, but also by killing of the babies, potential babies themselves, and the infrastructure that enable reproduction within Gaza. And this is something so scary for the community because talking about reproductive justice makes you think about reproductive agency. And if you thought about reproductive agency, the ability or the desire of people or their desire to control their reproduction is very, very, very difficult in Gaza. For instance, let's say that a couple would like to reproduce or they would like to have only intimate moments among themselves within everything that's happening. And it's like a human nature is something that they deserve to have. But then they can't because of 90% damage of the homes in Gaza. Israel have damaged more than 90% of homes. They can't do that because of the overcrowding in shelters, in hospitals, and schools, or wherever they are. So it's very difficult to do that, even if they wanted to have that experience for reproduction or just for their intimacy and health. Also, if people didn't want to reproduce, as like in the second one, the right not to have a child, it's very, very difficult because contraceptives are not allowed in Gaza. Israel doesn't allow them to enter. If women have, there were like UN reports documenting multiple cases of sexual abuse of women and men and children in Israeli detention camps and in Gaza with the ground invasion. But to focus more on women because they would be like, they might have more consequences with the potentiality of being pregnant. If those women like got pregnant or if those women were just out after being raped, they will not be able to get emergency pills. So they will not be able to stop the pregnancy and they will not be able to get abortion because there's like no safe clinics for that in Gaza. The whole situation is very, very difficult. And even if we wanted to talk about something before that, with the contraceptives, I remember at the beginning of the genocide, because the sanitary products were not allowed into Gaza, women and girls started to take contraceptive pills to stop or like delay periods, hoping that they can delay it like 2 months or something, and then the genocide's over, and then they can like have a normal cycle and all of that. But just like a few months later, no contraceptives, no sanitary products, and nothing. And now they have to depend on improvised tent cloth or like any dirty cloth that they have to use for period and other stuff that increases UTI infection, urinary tract infections, and causing so many things. So even people, if they didn't want like to have children, it's very difficult decision to be made within those circumstances. And the last thing is to raise children in a safe and dignified environment, which is almost impossible now in Gaza. With the situation of having more than 39,000 children who are orphans in Gaza right now, and having 17,000 of them who are orphans from both parents. Many of them are sole survivors. So they have no one to depend on, to take care of them, to feed them, to cuddle them if they were so afraid or unable to deal with the situation around them, which is a genocide, and no one is prepared to deal with that. And they're just children. So we're talking about a huge, half of the population of Gaza are children. So we're talking about more than 1 million people who are only children, and they are living those unbelievable circumstances. Many, many thousands of them are unaccompanied, and they're living those circumstances by themselves. And you can see like how in like the worst situation with the Gaza Humanitarian Organization, with children of 2, 3, 4 different ages going there trying to get aid and being murdered, sniped by Israeli occupation forces, targeted by quadricopters and other means of murder. So this is like another way where the environment of raising children is very dangerous in Gaza. And that brings me back to the moment when my friend said she hopes if she can bring back or get back her children to her womb so she can protect them, because they can't protect them with those like unstable situations within Gaza. And talking about reproduction, like in general, around those 3 pillars, we need to remember that, and it's also like documented in the article, that 90% of women who have been killed in Gaza were killed inside their homes. So women were targeted. Women were targeted for their being a woman, so part of the eradication, but also for their being able to reproduce, so to kill 2 by attacking or targeting 1 person. And this is also something that is documented in the article, with the Israeli attacks on pregnant women, specifically with their T-shirt that went so viral after the first Israeli aggression over Gaza, depicting a pregnant woman at a crosshair of a rifle and 1 shot, 2 kills, showing that killing a pregnant woman will make it easier to end the Palestinian population or eradicate them.
Thank you so much, both of you. And I think, that historical context is really important. And I think it's very useful to see the use of the reproductive justice framework in a different context, as I think it provides a very clear framing for people to understand in concrete ways what is going on and how people's sexual and reproductive lives are being impacted in Gaza right now. And I think it's also a reminder that when we're talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights, we're not only talking about access to services, even though that's important, but we're getting to issues as fundamental as sexual and reproductive autonomy. We're getting to issues around dignity, survival, mental health, especially when we're thinking about children. So I think it's really helpful to bring all this together in such a structured way. One theme that came out in both of our papers is about speaking truthfully. In the editorial, that we wrote, we talk about how shrinking civic and academic space makes it hard to speak up for sexual and reproductive health and rights in Palestine. And I wonder, how has this shrinking space affected your ability as researchers, practitioners, or advocates to work and publish on these issues?
Thank you so much. First of all, as Cordelia have mentioned at the beginning, to find that a whole issue is calling for any publication on Palestine is something in itself, showing the reality of what's happening, of like silencing, or people are being afraid of talking about that. Specifically that we had multiple publications before, but then why we don't have enough publications after the genocide. Specifically, everything is getting worse and worse, and things are way more documented because of live streams of the genocide. So that shows in itself that there's like a huge campaign of silencing academics and activists and working on Palestine in general. But as a Palestinian woman and a researcher, speaking truthfully of everything that's happening and unfolding in Gaza is very difficult, like emotionally, politically, and all of that. And it might be like dangerous also politically because of the whole atmosphere. I remember when the genocide started and I started speaking about everything that's happening in Gaza. And I'm like a PhD researcher in one of the universities. And I was told and I was asked by so many people, I believe they're good intentions, but they were like helping me to colonize my language, my personal experience, to tone it down, to become more political, more diplomatic, and describing something that's undescribable in any like terms other than the people witnessing the reality. But no, we can't do that. We have to describe it in a way that will be accepted by the Western audience and their ability to differentiate between things. The other thing that I faced a lot is the pressure to balance and neutralize my language. And that happened in my last application. I tried to publish something about reproductive genocide, about reprocide, using ethnographic data and autoethnography, specifically depending on witnesses from Gaza who have faced those reproductive genocidal crimes. And they reached out to me and told me, Hala, please make that visible, make it known. So I started writing about that, and then I sent it to one of the journals, and I got a very interesting response with multiple comments. But the comments that my supervisors and other people were able to highlight were related to neutralizing. So in a way, I was like asked to neutralize my language, to talk, for instance, when the Israeli occupation army have bombed the best clinic, I was asked to neutralize and say why they bombed it. So what was their excuse? And so many like other stuff, which I will not do. The other thing is I was asked to prove the case of genocide, which is something, I'm not a legal expert, and I wasn't proving the case of legally the case. I just referenced the ICJ ruling on being a plausible genocide. And from those types of experiences to be silenced because I'm not neutral enough, or I'm not using the language that some academic places would prefer to use, is in itself dehumanizing and silencing, because this a claim of being neutral is not actually neutral. When they ask people to use those political terms that doesn't contain settler colonialism or genocide and those stuff, this is not a neutrality. This is siding by the most powerful party in the conflict, or in this settler colonial situation. So it's not actually neutrality, it's just people are afraid and they just prefer to be with the stronger parties and with the stronger people. And this is something I will not choose, because we're already disadvantaged. I will not disadvantage myself and my people. In so many other circumstances, we had some events were canceled, some invitations were deferred, or places, venues were changed because of the fear of being attacked and so many things. But I always remember something, that being truthful to what's happening and unfolding now is a huge burden and a huge responsibility to all of us, because whatever I'm facing, whatever I'm living from those attacks that's happening to me is not at all compared with what my people are living in Gaza. I'm very privileged to be outside in the UK. I'm very privileged to be able to eat, to drink, to have electricity, to be in a safe environment where there is no bombs coming from the sky to kill me and the people around me. So those attacks are nothing compared with that. And within that privilege, I need to recognize that those types of attacks are also privileges. And I need to be stronger than them and to keep fighting and to keep vocal about everything that's happening, because it's responsibility and the least that we can do. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Hala, hearing you speak, it's shocking, the kind of silencing that you've had to experience, but so unfortunately unsurprising that you've experienced this. I come from writing on this topic as someone who is a British academic in a secure as possible job in the UK higher education climate. And for me, there are probably some risks of being very clear about the genocide in Gaza. But relatively speaking, compared to other contexts, perhaps like Germany, it is a relatively freer environment. And so any pushback is really a drop in the ocean compared to what's happening in Gaza for people who are Palestinian. And so for me, I guess I see this topic more as, what is the risk if I don't speak out? Who am I as a reproductive justice scholar if I feel cowed and feel like I can't speak out when I am coming at this with all the privileges possible as someone who should be speaking out? So yeah, for me, it's a responsibility, and any risks are far outweighed by the clear speaking the truth of what is happening. And I think what we're trying to do in this commentary is, I don't think there's anything controversial here. We are relaying reports that are clearly setting out sexual and reproductive health rights atrocities. These are reports from the United Nations, from the WHO, from the International Planned Parenthood Federation. These aren't radical organizations calling this a genocide. Hala, you mentioned from the ICJ. This shouldn't be controversial to talk in this language. So yeah, that's kind of from my perspective as a non-Palestinian in this situation.
Thank you both. I think really important perspectives. I think the idea of neutral language in itself might be a fallacy and one that's worth digging into. But I think what you're speaking to is the importance of speaking out, particularly when we're in a position of relative privilege. And that still doesn't make it easy. And so I think it's really important that you have written this commentary. I think this is really incredibly important information to be getting out to a broader audience. And I really want to appreciate that even if the risks you're taking might be smaller or fewer than the risks that other people are living through right now, they're still not insignificant. And particularly, Hala, you articulated that very clearly. So I guess I want to try and be a little bit forward-looking here and wonder, from your perspective, what would a truly rights-based sexual and reproductive health and rights response in Gaza look like today, if such a thing is even possible, given current conditions and where we're at?
Okay, thank you. To start with, I'll start with the last question that we talked about. We need people to be more vocal. We need people to be more the front, talking about it, making action and making activism. Because if they didn't do, then what world are we living in? We should be living at the 21st century. We've all said that never again will be never again, but we're all repeating things and repeating our silence, to be honest, and our complicity by choosing to be silent in times where not standing silent is at least something that we can measure. But before talking about that, we need to remember that the situation in Gaza is not just reproductive genocide situation. It's a whole genocide. And to talk about justice and rights and all of that, we need first to tackle what's right now is putting the life at risk and denying life of Palestinians every single day, which is the genocide. So first of all, we have to call for a ceasefire. We have to act and work until we have a sustainable ceasefire for the Palestinians in Gaza and all Palestine. We need the occupation to end, and we need the siege, the blockade to be lifted from over Gaza. So those other stuff could happen. And to reach that level, to reach that stage, we need to work a lot on so many things until we reach that. But after we do that, after we have the ceasefire, the blockade left and all of that, we need to start working in a very structural way on all the structural violence that have been in place due to the Israeli genocide in Gaza and before that, but basically the genocide with the damage of the infrastructure, with the murder of experienced senior doctors who are managing the situation of reproduction in Gaza and the whole medical and health situation in Gaza. We have to focus on the homes, on the houses, on the education, because the denial of education have produced increase in early marriage, and that will increase the sexual and reproductive violence against women and girls in Gaza. We have also to focus on simple things like sanitary products, sanitary rights of women and girls in Gaza, but also in prisons that were denied also their like basic rights of having those sanitary products. And we have to remember that anything we think about, anything we would like to work about, have to happen while Palestinians, specifically from Gaza, if it's about Gaza, are at the forefront, are like Palestinian-centered. Anything, any intervention, any collaboration is with Palestinians to be at the front line, because they are the people who have experienced everything. They are the people who have the local knowledge, the local nuanced experience of everything that's happening, and are more capable of anyone else to deal with it in better and nuanced way than others. And hopefully with like working on all of those things, allowing things to enter, helping the community to become more able to resist what's happening to them by standing together and holding hands together and putting the Palestinians at the forefront. We will start like the physical reproduction, let's say supportive reproduction after this like genocidal reproduction. So to rebuild the infrastructure, the hospitals, the clinics, help in training doctors to become senior and like obstetric and gynecologist and all of those things, because it's like so much needed right now. And while we're doing that, we need to focus also on the pillars that we talked about, with the right of people to have children, with the right of not having children, so to make sure that all resources are there. And the most important is to make sure that if those people had children, then they should be able to raise them in dignified and warm environment, to raise them up in a way that they deserve. Thank you.
I think that was a really powerful and comprehensive response, Hala. And I think what you're getting at there really shows the importance of why reproductive justice is a useful framework, because you can't just take something like contraception or fertility treatment or abortion or menstruation as an individual thing. Instead, we've got to understand how this is embedded in people's lives in a much wider sense. And so, yeah, I guess I'd summarize that by saying I don't think we really can have a truly rights-based sexual and reproductive health response in Gaza under a genocide. There is no tinkering with individual services or little amendments or something, or letting one aspect of, a service in when people are being murdered and people are being bombarded and being killed when they're trying to access services. It's impossible. So until this ends, there is no way of having reproductive justice or sexual and reproductive health and rights in Gaza.
Thank you both for very powerful interventions, and I think laying out some immediate short-term needs before we could even create conditions under which we might think about a much longer-term rights-based response. And I think very importantly, for situating sexual and reproductive health and rights and reproductive justice much more broadly within justice, within people's lives as a whole, and really noting the interrelated nature of human rights, that we need to be addressing all of this in order to even start thinking about the reproductive justice aspects of it. So thank you. So finally, and if you don't mind me getting just a little bit more personal here, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're sustaining yourselves and your work during this time, which is a really difficult time, and what gives you hope through all of this.
I'll start. It might be dark. Sorry for that, but we are living in dark times, and being dark is just very appropriate. Honestly, the only thing that keeps me going and keep me strong is the guilt I feel to the people in Gaza, to my people. When this genocide started, I tried very hard to get back to Gaza, to be around my people, because this is the most important way that we can help them, is to be with them and carry their hands to survive within everything that's happening. But I couldn't, because I'm Palestinian from Gaza, and Palestinians are not allowed into Gaza by Israel. So after that, I started working on activism, demonstrations, events, and social media, everything I was able to reach. And even I wasn't able, I struggled for that, because it's a responsibility to make everything known and to work and make action to change the situation. Although it's very, very, very difficult, but it's the least thing that we can do. And as I said before, we're very privileged to be outside and to be able to struggle with some risks, but nothing compared with a whole loss of life, a whole loss of family, a whole loss of home, home, city, country, homeland, and all of that. So like there are some risks, but they're not like at all compared to whatever Palestinians are facing in Gaza every single day. So that keeps me like from when I deal with something very difficult as writing about reproductive health or like talking about the hundreds of my friends and family members, relatives who have been killed within the genocide. I just remember that I have the privilege to be listened to. I have the privilege to be able to speak about that in a safe environment. So I have to do that. And the second thing is something like talking about hope. Hope is a very painful thing in our context. I remember in other times when we had hope that we were murdered because the world didn't hear about us. We were not using the right tools to reach out to them. We have to learn English. We have to know like international humanitarian law and like to be able to speak legally with the international community. And we've done that. And no one, even after like listening to us, it didn't make like a huge change. We're murdered in a level that we've never been murdered before, even like in 1948 Nakba. Nothing like this have ever happened compared to this genocide. So like hope is very, very painful, and having it every single day while seeing what's unfolding and that your hope is just like killed as everything that we're going through is difficult. But for me, and it's something that my supervisors usually tell me even before the genocide, my approach in life reminds them of one of the quotes of Gramsci, which is something about optimism of act with the pessimism of intellect. So although I don't have, unfortunately, any hope and better future for us, maybe I desire that, but I don't see it with everything that's happening right now. I keep on working. I keep on working very hard. I keep on making action and mobilizing people. Because even if we were not able to free Palestine right now, at least we'll be able to reduce the damage, reduce the murder, reduce the type of impunity that Israel as like and their leaders as war criminals are having in this current world that we're living in. So making action and being active and all of that is the only type of hope that maybe I see, and I hope people that would be able to see and provide to others, because it's something that also like is transmitted to people inside Gaza and keeps them surviving because they see that they're not alone, and they need to see that and feel that there are other people outside feeling them, listening to them, and working very hard with them until the genocide is over and all of those atrocious crimes have an end. Thank you.
That's such a moving and important response, Hala. And I think when I feel glimmers of hope, it's when we see more people waking up, more people who perhaps had their heads in the sand about this being a genocide, or really understanding that we must be vocal about calling for Palestinian liberation. And yet with that hope, every day that continues, more people are being murdered. And so it's not I guess like you were describing, it's not an easy hope, or it's not a particularly positive hope all the time when we're in such dark times. So hopefully we will see more people understand that we have to speak up. You have to be incredibly clear on what your beliefs are about Palestine, because it's that silence and that complicity which is what's keeping this genocide going and going for so many months.
Thank you both. And very understandable that hope is in short supply in the current moment, but I think really important to see you both channeling any glimmers of hope into action. And I think that there's really important questions for everybody in this current moment. What can I do? It depends on who I am, where I am, what my discipline is, what my strengths are, what my platforms are, but everybody can do something right now. And I think sort of, again, raising that awareness about the need for more collective action is a really important piece of what needs to be done. So thank you both for your time today, for all of your incredible insights and this very important discussion. You can find both of the papers we discussed today, No Justice in a Genocide and Securing Spaces to Speak Out, online and open access at srhmjournal.org or through the links in the show notes. Following the publication of the Securing Spaces to Speak Out editorial, co-written with SRHM Board of Trustees co-chair Sapna Desai, we launched an open call for papers on sexual and reproductive health and rights in war and armed conflict. If you're working on these issues, we encourage you to submit your work to this call for papers. Full details are in the show notes as well. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe and share the podcast to help amplify critical conversations on sexual and reproductive health and rights around the world.
Thanks for joining us for this insightful conversation. Please check the show notes for a link to the SRHM Journal, which is available online and open access. Follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter to receive notifications for new publications. If you're enjoying this podcast, please subscribe, give us a rating, or leave a review. Sharing evidence-based and rights-grounded knowledge is our passion, and it's also critical to support the advocacy and actions that need to be taken to improve SRHR for all. We would very much appreciate it. Thank you for supporting the SRHM podcast, which is produced by our staff. The music was composed by Tiber Christian and Salomon Beautombe.